Eleanor Whitaker pressed her back against the cold wall of the general store and tried to make herself small. Victor's fingers were wrapped around her wrist, not tight enough to draw attention, just tight enough to remind her who she belonged to. 3 years. 3 years she had learned to breathe around his grip. 3 years she had learned to smile through the pain. And then the door opened. And everything she had accepted as permanent walked right up to the edge of breaking. If this story already has your heart subscribed to this channel, follow Eleanor's journey all the way to the end and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer morning Victor Hale decided to accompany Eleanor to the general store was the same morning Caleb Mercer rode down from the mountains for the first time in 4 months. Neither of them knew the other existed yet. That was the last morning that would be true. Red Hollow sat in a wide valley pressed between 2 ridgelines, and in the summer the heat came down heavy and flat and stayed there all day like something that had given up trying to move. The town had one main street, one sheriff, one church, and one man everybody answered to without ever being told they had to. Victor Hale had never needed to announce his authority. He had simply always had it. Eleanor walked 3 steps behind him down the boardwalk because she had learned in the first month of their marriage that walking beside him invited comparison. And comparison invited correction. And correction in the Hale household came in forms that didn't leave marks where people could see them. She carried a list in her left hand. Her right wrist was wrapped in a cloth strip she told the laundress was from a kitchen burn. The laundress, a woman named Dottie, who had worked for the Hales for 11 years, never asked follow-up questions. Eleanor had stopped being surprised by that in year 2. "You'll wait inside," Victor said without turning around. "I have business with Garner." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Not yes, Victor. Not yes, sir. Just yes." She had learned to strip her answers down to the smallest possible unit of sound. Anything more gave him something to respond to, and responses led to conversations, and conversations in private led to the kind of silence that followed her to bed. Sheriff Dale Garner was standing outside the hardware store when Victor reached him, and the 2 men shook hands the way men do when they've been protecting each other's interest for so long the gesture has become reflex. Garner had a tin star on his chest and a particular talent for not seeing things that happened inside the Hale property lines. Eleanor stepped up onto the general store porch and pushed through the door. The inside of Callaway's general store smelled like sawdust and dried tobacco, and the faint sweetness of molasses barrels, and on any other morning Eleanor might have let herself breathe it in. She used to love the smell of stores when she was a girl. Her father's ranch had been 40 miles north, and coming into town had felt like arriving somewhere important. She had believed at 17 that the world was full of arrivals. At 25, she understood that some arrivals were just different kinds of captivity. "Mrs. Hale." Roy Calloway nodded from behind the counter. He was a thin man with a thin smile who had extended the Hale household unlimited credit for a decade and understood implicitly that the credit was the relationship. "Good morning, Roy." She set her list on the counter. "I need these filled, please." Roy picked up the list and began moving without reading it. He already knew what the Hale household needed. He had been filling the same order with small variations for 3 years. Eleanor moved to the far side of the store where the dry goods sat on deep shelves, and she let herself stand still for a moment. Just a moment. Just long enough to feel the absence of Victor's proximity, like a person stepping out of shadow into a narrow band of sun. She pressed her right wrist against her hip, gently feeling the ache beneath the cloth. It wasn't the worst it had ever been. That distinction belonged to a night 8 months ago that she did not revisit in daylight if she could help it. She was studying the label on a can of peaches, not because she needed peaches, but because looking at something ordinary helped when the door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. People came and went from Callaway's all morning. She had learned to distinguish Victor's entry by the specific weight of the silence that preceded it. This was a different quality of entrance, heavier in a different way, like something that had been a long time traveling. Roy Calloway said, "Help you," with slightly less warmth than he used for Eleanor, which told her the newcomer was either a stranger or someone without local credit. "Just supplies," a voice said. It was a low voice, not performed, not trying to establish anything, just a voice that said what it meant in the fewest words available and apparently considered that sufficient. Eleanor did not look up from the peach can. She heard boots on the floorboards, slow, unhurried. She heard Roy moving behind the counter reciting prices in the cautious tone he used with people he hadn't yet categorized. She heard the clink of coin on wood and the rustle of burlap. She did not hear the door open again. She became aware gradually that the stranger had stopped moving. She still didn't turn around. "Ma'am?" The word landed quietly. It wasn't a greeting or an intrusion. It was the sound of someone acknowledging another person's presence without demanding anything from it. Eleanor turned slightly. Not all the way. Enough to see a man standing in the middle of the store with a paper-wrapped parcel under one arm, and a look on his face that she could only describe as still. Not blank, not cold, just still. Like something that had decided long ago not to perform anything it didn't mean. He was tall, lean in the way that comes from years of physical work without excess. His hat was pushed back enough to see his face, which was weathered and serious, and younger than the lines around his eyes suggested. His clothes were worn but clean. There was dried trail dust on his boots, and something about the way he stood weight distributed nothing tight that said he spent his life in terrain that required balance. She met his eyes for approximately 1 second. She looked away. "Morning," she said, and turned back to the shelf. She heard him move toward the counter. She heard him exchange a few more words with Roy about a specific grade of rope and whether Calloway carried it, and she heard Roy say he could order it in, and she heard the stranger say he'd check back through. She was replacing the peach can on the shelf when the door opened again. The silence that entered was the specific kind she had trained herself to recognize. Victor. She felt it before she heard his boots. A tightening in her chest, a particular kind of alertness that was not attention, but preparation. She straightened her spine. She turned toward the door. Victor Hale was not a physically imposing man, which had confused Eleanor at first, before she understood that physical size was only one instrument of dominance and far from the most effective. He was 51 years old, slim, with steel gray hair worn neat, and a face that had learned over decades to present pleasantness as its resting expression. He wore good clothes. He owned land that ran 20 miles in 2 directions. He had sent a man to jail once by mentioning at a dinner party that he had concerns about the man's accounting. "Finished already?" he said to Eleanor, crossing the store toward her. "Nearly." She kept her voice level. "Roy." Victor nodded at the counter without looking at it. "Add the order to the account." "Of course, Mr. Hale." Victor reached Eleanor and took her by the wrist. Not rough. He was never rough in public. It was more the way a man picks up something he owns naturally without ceremony, as if the object has no preference in the matter. Eleanor felt the cloth strip compress against the ache underneath it and kept her face exactly where it was. "We're going," Victor said. "The order isn't—" "Roy will send it up." His hand tightened fractionally. An adjustment, not a punishment. A reminder. "We're going." Eleanor looked at the counter where Roy was carefully studying his ledger. She looked at the 2 older women near the fabric bolts, who were suddenly very absorbed in a bolt of blue calico. She looked at the floor, and then she looked up. The stranger was still in the store. He was standing 4 feet away, parcel under his arm, watching Victor's hand on Eleanor's wrist, with an expression that had gone from still to something else. Something quiet and settled, and she would think later, almost sad, not surprised. As if he had seen this particular arrangement before and found it each time equally intolerable. Victor noticed him noticing. The temperature in the room did a specific thing that Eleanor had felt before when her father's old cattle dog got between a calf and something that meant it harm. Not aggression exactly. More like the activation of something old and decided. "You need something," Victor said to the stranger. His tone was pleasant. It was always pleasant. The pleasantness was the message. "Let go of her arm," the stranger said. Eleanor went very still. Roy Calloway went very still. The women at the fabric bolts went very still. The entire store seemed to pull a breath and hold it. Victor Hale smiled. It was the smile he used when someone had made a mistake significant enough to warrant his full attention. "Excuse me, you heard me." The stranger didn't raise his voice. He didn't shift his weight or put down his parcel or reach for anything at his belt. He just stood there with that settled look on his face and said it again quietly, like a man repeating something obvious to someone who should have understood it the first time. "Let go of her arm." Victor's smile didn't change, which meant the smile was now doing something different than smiling. "Friend," he said, "I don't know where you came from or what you think you're looking at, but that is my wife, and you are in my town, and I would strongly advise you to collect your goods and walk out that door before you find yourself in a situation you aren't equipped to manage." The stranger looked at Victor, then he looked at Eleanor. And when he looked at Eleanor, he didn't look at her the way people in Red Hollow looked at her, which was carefully quickly at an angle designed to miss the details. He looked at her straight, like she was a person in a room who deserved to be looked at. She did not know how to remember the last time someone had done that. "Ma'am?" he said. And his voice was quiet, and it asked nothing, and it offered something she didn't have a word for yet. "Are you all right?" Eleanor opened her mouth, and Victor's hand tightened. Not fractionally this time. She made a sound she hadn't meant to make. Something moved across the stranger's face. Fast and controlled, but she saw it. The way she saw everything, because 3 years of surviving in a house with Victor Hale had made her a student of the smallest shifts in the human face. "I'm going to say it one more time," the stranger said to Victor. His voice was still quiet, still level, but it had changed in a way that Eleanor could feel in her back teeth. "Let go of her arm." Victor released her, not because he was afraid. Victor Hale had not been afraid of another man in 30 years, and the calculation on his face made clear he was already determining the consequences for the stranger for Roy, who had witnessed this for the women at the bolts for Eleanor, who had stood here while this happened and had not corrected it. He released her because releasing her was the more strategic move. Because making a scene in Calloway's on a Wednesday morning with 2 women and a shopkeeper as witnesses was not how Victor Hale operated. Victor Hale operated in private. Victor Hale operated at night. Victor Hale operated in the spaces between what people could prove and what they suspected. "We'll finish this conversation at home," Victor said to Eleanor. Pleasantly. She knew what that meant. She had known what that meant for 3 years. Victor turned to the stranger with the same pleasant expression and a look in his eyes that was the opposite of his voice. "I don't know your name," he said, "but Red Hollow is a small town, and I have a long memory." "Caleb Mercer," the stranger said, "and I'll be here a week." Victor held his gaze for exactly long enough to communicate that this mattered and would be remembered. Then he turned, put his hand on Eleanor's backlight, guiding the public gesture of a solicitous husband, and walked her toward the door. Eleanor went. She went because not going had consequences that she was the only one who would pay, and because one moment of something in a general store did not change the architecture of her life, and because she understood with the clarity that 3 years of captivity sharpens in a person, that hope without a plan is just another form of exposure. But at the door she paused. 1 second. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. She heard the store's weighted silence, and she heard Victor's breathing beside her, and she heard underneath both of those things something she hadn't heard in this town in as long as she could remember. Someone standing their ground. Victor guided her through the door. The summer heat pressed in from every direction. Eleanor walked 3 steps behind him down the boardwalk. But something had changed. Not in her life. Not yet. In her. In the place where she had kept the word freedom, stored in the dark, without a plan, without a face, without the particular sound of a quiet voice saying what it meant. Inside Calloway's general store, Caleb Mercer stood in the middle of the room with his parcel under his arm and watched the door close. Roy Calloway exhaled from behind the counter. It was a long, complicated exhale, the sound of a man who had just watched something he wasn't sure how to account for. "You just made yourself an enemy," Roy said. Caleb picked up his rope coil from the counter. Seemed like she already had one. Roy had no answer for that. Caleb settled his hat and moved toward the door, and one of the women near the fabric bolts said quietly, "Not quite meaning for it to carry." Nobody talks to Victor Hale like that. Caleb paused at the door. "No," he said. "I reckon they don't." He walked out. The Hale house sat at the far end of the main street past the church and the assay office, and the livery behind a low iron fence that was decorative rather than functional, because Victor Hale had never needed a fence to keep people out. The house was large and well-maintained, and entirely ordinary from the outside, which was the point. Eleanor walked through the front door and straight to the kitchen, because movement was safer than stillness. After one of Victor's public humiliations, she had learned to route her days around his moods, the way a river routes around hard stone, wearing new channels, finding the path of least resistance, surviving. Alma the cook was at the stove and did not look up when Eleanor entered. Eleanor began removing items from the pantry, organizing them, straightening a shelf that didn't need straightening, filling her hands so they would stop shaking before Victor found her. She heard the front door. She heard his measured steps in the hall. She heard him stop in the kitchen doorway. She continued straightening the shelf. "Alma," Victor said, "give us the room. Give us the—" Alma wiped her hands on her apron and walked out without a word or a look. The door to the back garden opened and closed. Eleanor turned around. Victor was standing in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and his face arranged in the expression she called the quiet one, not the pleasant smile, not the angry stillness, but the one in between, the one that meant he was deciding, calculating, determining what the situation required. "That man," he said. "Do you know him?" "No." "You've never seen him before?" "No, Victor." "He turned his hat in his hands, once, twice. And yet he spoke to me on your behalf." "I didn't ask him to." "No." Victor's voice was perfectly reasonable. It was always perfectly reasonable. That was the thing about Victor that had taken her longest to explain to herself in the hours she spent explaining things to herself during the nights she lay awake and catalogued what her life had become. He wasn't irrational. He was entirely rational. His cruelty had reasons. His control had systems. His punishments had logic. That was what made them so complete. "No, you didn't ask him to. But he did it anyway. And you stood there." "I didn't—" "You stood there," Victor said again, quieter. "And you didn't correct him. You didn't tell him that your husband was simply assisting you out of the store. You didn't say anything to discourage what he was doing." Eleanor's wrist throbbed. "What did you want me to say?" she asked, and she kept her voice level with an effort that cost her more than he would ever see. "That it wasn't his business," Victor said. "That we didn't need his interference. That my wife knows how to conduct herself in public." He paused. He crossed to the kitchen table and pulled out a chair and sat in it very calmly. "Come here, Eleanor." She came, because not coming was a different kind of conversation, and she was already calculating the way she always calculated what she could absorb now and what she needed to preserve for later. Because the word freedom, the one she kept in the dark, had a plan attached to it now. A small plan, half-formed, trembling. But there. She had hidden $47 in the lining of her winter coat. She had memorized the stage schedule to Billings. She had one contact, a cousin in Colorado, who didn't know Victor had never heard his name, and had written to Eleanor twice in the last year, with no response, because Eleanor's mail was managed by the household account at the post office, which Victor reviewed. She stood at the kitchen table, and she survived the next 20 minutes the way she always survived, by going somewhere inside herself that Victor had never found and could not reach, no matter how hard he pressed. Victor's Thursday schedule was predictable. He rode out to the north parcel at 7 in the morning to meet with his foreman, came back at noon for dinner, spent the afternoon in his study with the accounts, and rode to Garner's house in the evening for cards. He was gone by 6 and rarely home before 10. Eleanor had documented this schedule over 14 months. She had never known what to do with it. Now she pressed her hand against the hidden pocket in her winter coat and felt the crinkle of folded bills and thought about a man she'd seen for 4 minutes in a general store who had said 2 words and changed the composition of the air. She was not naive. She was not the kind of woman who watched a stranger say something brave and decided it meant something for her. She had learned to keep expectation at arm's length. Expectation was its own kind of wound, but she also understood, and this was the part that lived in her chest all afternoon, that she could not quiet, that there were $47 in her coat and a stage schedule in her memory, and a cousin in Colorado who had written twice without answer, and that for 3 years she had been waiting for something she couldn't name, and that this morning in Calloway's general store something had said her name. She saw him again on Friday. She was at the well behind the church. She came here sometimes in the early morning before the household required her, because it was the one place in Red Hollow where Victor's presence wasn't ambient, and she was drawing up a bucket when she heard boots on the path behind the church and looked up. Caleb Mercer slowed when he saw her. He had a canvas bag over one shoulder and the look of a man who had already been somewhere before most of the town had started moving. "Ma'am," he said. He would have walked past her. She knew that. He would have walked past her and continued down whatever path he was on, because he didn't seem like a man who pressed himself into situations he hadn't been invited to. "Mr. Mercer," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "For yesterday." He looked at her in that direct way, the way she'd noticed in the store. "You're welcome." "It won't make things easier for me," she said. She wasn't accusing him. She was just telling him the truth because the truth seemed like the appropriate thing between two people who had nothing to perform for each other. "I want you to know I understand that. What you did, it matters. But it doesn't." She stopped. She adjusted. "It doesn't change things." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "No, I reckon it doesn't." "Then why did you do it?" The question came out quieter than she'd intended. Almost small. She hadn't meant it to be a real question. She'd meant it to be the kind of question a person says to close a subject. But Caleb Mercer considered it like it was a real question. "Because some things are wrong," he said. "And when you see something wrong, you say so, even if it doesn't change anything." Eleanor looked at him. "Even if it makes things worse for the person you're saying it for?" she asked. "Ma'am." His voice was quiet. "I saw his hand on your arm. I saw your face. And I saw every person in that store look somewhere else." He paused. "I wasn't going to be another person looking somewhere else." Eleanor turned back to the well. She cranked the rope slowly. "He'll go after you," she said. "If you stay in town. He'll find a reason. He's welcome to try. You don't know what he's capable of." "No," Caleb said. "But I know what kind of man he is." Eleanor pulled the bucket over the edge. The water was cold even in summer, fed by a mountain spring, and it felt real in a way that not many things in Red Hollow felt real to her anymore. "Why are you in town?" she asked. "Supply run. Heading back to the ridge after the week." She nodded. She didn't know what she had hoped the answer would be. "There's a marshal," she said, and she said it quietly, the way she said the things that lived in the dark. "In Billings. My father knew him before." She stopped. She reorganized. "Before my father died. His name is Aldous Webb. He was an honest man, my father said." Caleb said nothing, but he was listening the way he did everything completely without visible impatience. "Victor controls the sheriff here," Eleanor said. "He controls the judge. He controls the bank and the post office and the stage line schedule. There is no one in this county to go to." She set the bucket on the stone edge of the well. "But there's a marshal in Billings who might be outside his reach." She did not know why she was telling him this. She told herself it was because he had done something brave in a store, and that created between them a small momentary honesty. She told herself it was not because some part of her was making calculations that involved a stranger with a camp somewhere on the ridge and a week left in town. "That's useful to know," Caleb said. Eleanor picked up the bucket. Goodbye, Mr. Mercer. Ma'am. She walked back toward the main street. She did not look back. She did not have to. He was still standing at the well when she turned the corner. She could feel it. The way you can feel sometimes when something in the world has arranged itself around you in a new configuration, and the whole shape of things has quietly, without announcement, become different. $47. A stage schedule. A cousin in Colorado. And a man on the ridge with a week left in town, and the particular quality of stillness that comes from knowing bone deep what you will and will not tolerate. Eleanor walked back into the Hale house. She set the bucket on the kitchen table. She went to her room and pressed her hand against the winter coat in the wardrobe. She stood there for a long time. When she moved with purpose. She had a plan now. Not a complete one. But she had learned in 3 years that you rarely get the complete version before you start moving. You just start moving, and you trust the next step to reveal itself. That Friday evening, Victor came home from cards early. Eleanor heard the front door before she heard the clock strike 9, and her body knew what that meant before her mind caught up. She was in the sitting room with a piece of mending in her lap, not because she needed to mend it, but because having something in her hands gave her somewhere to look that wasn't at him. She did not look up when he came in. "You were at the well this morning," Victor said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor kept her needle moving. "I go every Friday. You spoke to someone." She did not hesitate. Hesitation was information, and information was leverage, and Victor collected leverage the way other men collected land. Mrs. Pruitt was passing. We said good morning. Victor crossed the room and stood at the window with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the dark street, the way he sometimes stood when he was deciding how much of what he knew to reveal. He had a talent for that, for making you uncertain whether he had seen everything or nothing, whether you were confessing or being tested. "The man from the store," he said. "Mercer." Eleanor set one stitch, then another. "What about him?" "He's still in town." "I wouldn't know that. He took a room at the Dutton boarding house." Victor turned from the window. "Which means he's planning to stay the week. Which is interesting for a man who came for supplies." Eleanor said nothing. She had learned that silence was the safest answer when Victor was building toward something. Silence gave him nothing to dismantle. "I want you to stay out of his way," Victor said. "Of course. I mean that specifically, Eleanor." He crossed to her chair and stood over her in that particular way he had, not threatening with movement, just with proximity, with the simple geometric fact of his body positioned above hers. "Not generally. Specifically. If you see him on the street, you cross to the other side. If he comes into a store while you're there, you leave. If he speaks to you, you don't respond." She looked up at him. His face was pleasant. "Yes, Victor," she said. He went to bed. Eleanor sat in the sitting room with her mending in her lap for another hour. Not sewing, just sitting, listening to the house settle around her, and thinking about a man at the well who had said some things are wrong, and you say so, even when it doesn't change anything. She thought about the $47. She thought about Aldous Webb in Billings. She thought about her cousin Clara in Colorado, who had written twice without answer. Then she folded the mending, set it on the side table, and went upstairs. She did not sleep, but she planned. And planning, she had found, was its own kind of sleep. Saturday morning, Victor rode to the north parcel at 7, as he always did on Saturdays, and Eleanor waited 20 minutes after the sound of his horse faded before she went to her wardrobe and pressed her hand flat against the hidden pocket in the winter coat. $47. She counted it, not because she'd forgotten the amount, but because touching it was real. Because real was something she needed more of. She put the coat back. She went downstairs. She told Alma she was going to the post office. Alma, stirring a pot she had been stirring at this hour for 11 years, said, "Yes, ma'am," without looking up. The post office was 2 blocks from the boarding house. Eleanor knew this the way she knew every distance in Red Hollow, because she had mapped this town in her head over 3 years, the way a person maps a place they are trying to figure out how to leave. She did not go to the boarding house. She went to the post office. But on the way back, she walked the long route. She told herself this was not deliberate. She told herself this the way you tell yourself things you mostly believe. Caleb Mercer was sitting on the front steps of the Dutton boarding house with a cup of coffee and a leather strap he was working oil into, and he looked up when she passed on the opposite side of the street, exactly the way Victor had told her to walk, and their eyes met across 12 feet of Main Street. Red Hollow on a Saturday morning, and neither of them stopped moving, and neither of them spoke. But he looked at her, and she looked back. And that was its own kind of conversation. She went home and sat at the kitchen table and thought about the stage to Billings. It ran on Tuesdays and Fridays. The Tuesday run left at 10 in the morning from the depot at the south end of Main Street. Victor's Tuesday schedule put him at the north parcel from 7 until noon. 3 hours. She would need maybe 90 minutes, but she would also need to not be stopped before she reached the depot. And in Red Hollow, Eleanor Whitaker Hale did not walk anywhere without someone noting it. Roy Calloway noted it. The women at the fabric bolts noted it. Dale Garner, who had his office window positioned at a particular angle for exactly this kind of noting, noted it. She would need a reason that was not unusual. She was still working through the problem on Saturday afternoon when Victor came home from the north parcel 2 hours early and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper in front of her. He looked at the paper. She looked up. "Household accounts," she said. It was not entirely a lie. The paper had numbers on it. Victor studied her face with the particular attention he gave things he was trying to read. "You seem occupied. I'm managing the linen inventory. Alma thinks we need new tablecloths before the Garners come to dinner." He accepted this. He accepted it because it was mundane, and because mundane things did not interest Victor, which was one of the only advantages Eleanor had ever been able to identify in their arrangement. He found her household life boring, and boring meant unwatched. "I'll be in the study," he said. "I'll have Alma bring your coffee." He went. Eleanor smoothed the paper with her hand, feeling her heart doing something specific and controlled in her chest, and stared at the numbers that were not entirely a lie. She had until Tuesday. She needed to be on that stage, and she needed to not be stopped. Sunday changed things. Sunday changed things because Margaret Hale came to dinner. Victor's aunt was 70 years old and had the bearing of someone who had decided early in life that other people's comfort was their own responsibility and not hers. She had raised Victor after his parents died of fever when he was 12, and she had raised him with a specific understanding of the world that the Hale name was a structure, and structures required maintenance, and maintenance required control. And control applied consistently was simply good management. She kissed Eleanor's cheek at the door and said, "You look thin," and sat at the head of the table, even though it was not her table, and Eleanor was the one who had set it. Victor watched his aunt the way men watch the one person they never fully outgrew answering to. "I heard about the business at Calloway's," Margaret said when Alma had brought the soup. Victor's spoon paused. "It's been handled," he said. "Has it?" Margaret did not make it a question. A drifter walks into Roy Calloway's store and tells you to take your hands off your own wife, and you walk out, and that's handled. There was no benefit in making a scene. There was no benefit in being made a fool of in front of the whole town, you mean. Victor's jaw moved. Eleanor kept her eyes on her soup. "He'll be gone by the end of the week," Victor said. "He's nobody. A trapper. He has no stake here." "Then why?" Margaret said, setting down her spoon with a small, precise sound. "Is Dale Garner unable to tell me anything useful about where he goes, who he talks to, or what his business is?" Silence. Eleanor did not move. "I've asked Dale to watch him," Victor said. "Watching isn't the same as handling." Margaret lifted her glass. "Your grandfather did not build what we have by watching things and hoping they resolved themselves. Aunt Margaret, the man needs to understand the order of things in this town." She said it the way she said everything, without drama, without heat, as a simple statement of operational fact. If he understands it and leaves, fine. If he doesn't understand it, she set her glass down. Then he needs help understanding it. Eleanor kept her face entirely still. She was thinking about Tuesday. She was thinking about 90 minutes and a stage to Billings. She was thinking about a marshal named Aldous Webb, who her father had called an honest man. "I'll speak to Dale," Victor said. Margaret looked at him the way she looked at things she found satisfactory, but not impressive. "See that you do." Dinner ended. Margaret left. Victor stood in the front hallway after the door closed and did not move for almost a minute, which was the thing he did when he was building something internally that he did not yet want Eleanor to see. "Go to bed," he said. She went. She lay awake until the clock downstairs struck 2. Then she got up, went to her wardrobe, and counted $47 in the dark. She was still planning when the sky outside her window began to gray. Monday morning, Roy Calloway closed his store early. Eleanor noticed this because she had learned to notice everything in Red Hollow that deviated from its established pattern, the way a person living in a house with a leaking roof learns to notice which particular sound means rain is coming. Roy closing at midday on a Monday meant Roy had been asked to close at midday on a Monday. Roy did what he was asked in this town the way everyone did what they were asked. She found out why by afternoon. Dottie the laundress told her without meaning to tell her, in the way that information traveled in Red Hollow sideways through the medium of people talking about adjacent things. "Heard there was some trouble down by the livery," Dottie said, working a flat iron across a linen tablecloth with the rhythm of long practice. "That mountain man. 3 of Hale's riders stopped him on his way back from the hardware." Eleanor's hands went still on the tablecloth she was folding. "Stopped him how?" she said. Dottie kept ironing. "Stopped him the way men get stopped when somebody wants to make a point." She paused. "He's all right. From what I heard, the riders are the ones who came off worse." She said this with the particular quality of voice that meant she was not surprised, which meant it was not entirely surprising news to Eleanor either. But Eleanor's heart was doing something complicated. She finished folding the tablecloth. She folded another one. "Where is he now?" she asked, and kept her voice at the same careful level she kept everything. "Still at Dutton's, I expect, unless he had the sense to leave." He hadn't left. She knew it before she confirmed it. She knew it the way she'd known he was still standing at the well that first morning, not by sight, but by some quality of the air in Red Hollow that had changed since Thursday and had not changed back. She did not go to Dutton's boarding house. She went to the church instead, because the church was the one place in town where Eleanor Whittaker Hale could sit for 30 minutes without being reported to anyone, and the minister's wife, a gentlewoman named Ruth Pierce, who had sad eyes and never asked questions, sometimes kept a pot of tea on. Ruth poured her tea and sat with her in the small back room of the church, and they talked about the weather and the summer heat and which families were struggling with the drought. And Eleanor drank her tea and felt something pulling in her chest like a hook in deep water. "Mrs. Pierce," she said, setting down her cup. Ruth looked at her. "If someone needed to send a letter," Eleanor said, "a private letter, without it going through the post office account." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I post my own correspondence through the mission circuit." She refilled Eleanor's cup. "Letters for the mission go out Mondays and Thursdays. No one checks a minister's post." Eleanor looked at her. Ruth looked back. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. "I have paper," Ruth said, "and ink if you need it." Eleanor wrote 2 letters. The first was to Aldous Webb, United States Marshal Billings. She told him her name, her husband's name, the name of the town, the nature of the situation, and the name of the judge Victor controlled. She told him she had documentation of specific events and dates that she kept in a locked tin under the floorboards of the cellar, which was the truth, and had been the truth for 14 months. She told him she needed someone outside the county's reach. The second letter was to her cousin Clara in Colorado. She told her she was alive. She told her she was planning. She told her she might be coming, and she might be coming fast, and if a letter or a wire arrived from Billings, Montana, asking about her to confirm whatever they confirmed. She sealed both letters. Ruth Pierce took them with hands that did not tremble. "God keep you, Eleanor," she said. and said it quietly, the way you say something you mean and aren't performing. Eleanor thanked her and walked home and made dinner and set Victor's table and said yes when he asked about her day and no when he asked if she'd heard anything else about the situation at the livery, and she went upstairs and lay in the dark with her heart doing its complicated thing, and thought about Tuesday. Tuesday morning arrived the way mornings in Red Hollow arrived in the summer, fast and hot with light that hit the street at a hard angle and made everything look like it was already under pressure. Victor rode to the north parcel at 7. Eleanor stood at the front window and watched him go. She waited 10 minutes. She went to her wardrobe. She took the $47 from the winter coat and folded them into the inside pocket of the jacket she was wearing. She took from the back of the wardrobe shelf a small flat tin that looked like it held sewing supplies and put it in the bag she carried for marketing. The tin held 14 months of dates and notes and the names of 3 men who had witnessed specific events and had said nothing and could be asked to say something by a marshal with federal authority. She went downstairs. Alma was at the stove. "I'm going to get thread from Calloway's," Eleanor said, "and I need to stop at the dry goods." Alma did not look up. "You want me to send Billy with you?" "No need." She kept her voice exactly as it always was. Level. Contained. The voice of a woman running an ordinary errand. "I won't be long." She walked out the front door. She walked 2 blocks north before she turned east. The stage depot was 6 blocks away. She had 90 minutes. She had not gone a block and a half when she heard her name. "Mrs. Hale." She stopped. Dale Garner was standing at the edge of the boardwalk with his thumbs in his belt and the look on his face of a man who had been asked to be somewhere specific at a specific time. "Morning," he said. "Early for marketing." Eleanor looked at him. She thought about the $47. She thought about the tin in her bag. "I have a long list today," she said. "Mr. Hale, know you're out." "Of course." She said it without blinking. "He asked me to stop by the hardware before he comes in at noon. Something about bolt specifications." She had no idea what bolt specifications were. She was betting that Dale Garner was also uncertain enough about bolt specifications to not press. Garner looked at her for a moment that lasted several beats longer than comfortable. Then he nodded. "I'll walk you up to Calloway's," he said. "That's not necessary." "I don't mind." It was not a conversation. It was supervision wearing the costume of courtesy. Eleanor understood this the way she understood everything about this town completely without illusion. She walked to Calloway's. She bought thread. She came back out and Garner was still there. And she thought about the stage leaving at 10, and it was now 8:42, and she had 68 minutes, and Garner had his thumbs in his belt, and she had $47 and a tin of evidence and nowhere to go while Dale Garner was standing on the boardwalk watching her do it. "Thank you, Dale," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She walked back home. She did not run. Running was information, and information was leverage. And she had not survived 3 years inside Victor Hale's system by giving away leverage before she needed to. She went inside. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed with her bag in her lap and the thread in her hand and the $47 still in her pocket and the tin still in the bag, and she sat there for a long time. Friday, she thought. The stage ran on Fridays too. She had until Friday. She put the tin back under the floorboard in the cellar. She put the money back in the coat. She went downstairs and made lunch for a household that did not know it was running out of time. That afternoon, Victor came home at noon with an expression Eleanor had not seen in a while. Not the pleasant one, not the quiet one, but a third one. The one she thought of as satisfied, which was in some ways the most alarming of the 3, because Victor's satisfaction always meant someone else's diminishment. He sat at the table and let Alma serve him, and said conversationally, "I hear Mercer's leaving Thursday." Eleanor poured his water. "Is that so?" "Dale had a word with him this morning." Victor picked up his fork. "Made certain things clear, about the town and its expectations." He ate a bite. "I think he understood." Eleanor set down the pitcher. She thought about a man with a cup of coffee on the front steps of the Dutton boarding house. She thought about a look across 12 feet of Main Street that was its own conversation. "I'm glad it's resolved," she said. Victor looked up at her. He was watching for something. She gave him nothing to find. "I thought you might be," he said, and went back to his food. After lunch, she went to the garden. She stood there for a long time. Then she went back inside and sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. And what she was doing, though she did not name, it was grieving something that had not quite happened yet. The door that had opened by 4 inches and was now being pressed shut again. 53 minutes, she thought. The Tuesday stage left at 10. She had had 68 minutes and a sheriff watching her, and she'd had 53 of them accounted for before she even reached the depot. It wasn't enough. She needed Garner somewhere else. She needed Victor somewhere else. She needed something to happen between now and Friday that changed the arrangement. She was still sitting at the table when she heard something outside. Not a voice. Not a door. Something underneath those things. She went to the front window. Caleb Mercer was walking down the main street of Red Hollow with Victor's foreman, a man named Colton Reed, on one side of him, and 2 of Victor's riders on the other. And the way they were arranged, the riders' clothes, the foreman talking into his ear, was not the arrangement of men having a conversation. Eleanor pressed her hand flat against the window glass. Caleb was not fighting it. He was walking, but his jaw was set in a way she could read from across the street, and his hands were loose at his sides in a way that was not relaxed but ready, and the riders were carrying the body language of men who had been told to make a point and were determining the best location to make it. They turned down the alley beside the feed store. Eleanor did not think. She picked up her bag, walked through the kitchen, told Alma she needed air, went out the back door, crossed the yard, cut through the gap in the fence, and came around the back of the feed store from the other direction. She heard voices before she saw them. Colton Reed's voice, specifically saying something about how Red Hollow wasn't a town for men who didn't understand their position, saying it pleasantly, the way everything got said in this town. She came around the corner. All 4 men looked at her. Caleb looked at her. His right eye was darkening. Someone had already made a point before the alley. "Mrs. Hale," Colton said. He was startled but recovering fast. "You shouldn't be back here." "I heard something fall," she said. She looked directly at Caleb. "Are you all right, sir?" "Ma'am." He said it the way he said everything. Steady. Her answer. "He's fine," Colton said. "We're just having a conversation." "Then I'm sure you won't mind having it somewhere more visible," Eleanor said. She had no idea where the words were coming from. They were coming from the same place the $47 had come from, the place she'd been building for 3 years in the dark. "The minister's wife is in the churchyard, and she has a direct view of this alley." This was not true, but Colton Reed did not know Ruth Pierce's gardening schedule. The 2 riders looked at Colton. Colton looked at Eleanor with a flat, assessing expression that meant he was recalculating. He was not afraid of Eleanor Whitaker Hale, but he was a man who managed Victor's interests carefully, and Victor's interests included not creating public spectacles, and Mrs. Hale standing in an alley with witnesses arguable was the beginning of a public spectacle. "We're done here anyway," Colton said. He looked at Caleb. "You remember what we talked about?" He walked past Eleanor without looking at her. The riders followed. She listened to their boots on the packed ground until she couldn't anymore. Then she turned. Caleb was looking at her. She looked back. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "No," she agreed. "He'll tell Victor." "I know." He was quiet a moment. Then, "Why did you—" Eleanor looked at her hands. "Because some things are wrong," she said. "And when you see something wrong, you say so." She looked up. "Even if it doesn't change anything." Something moved in his face. "It changes something," he said quietly. She looked at him. Really looked the way she hadn't let herself at the well, hadn't let herself across 12 feet of Main Street. She looked at the darkening eye and the set jaw and the hands still loose and ready at his sides, and the particular kind of stillness that she now understood, came from a man who had decided long ago what he would and would not accept in the world. "I need to be on the Friday stage," she said. She had not planned to say it. She said it anyway. Caleb did not react the way she expected. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look alarmed or doubtful. He said, "What time does it leave?" 10 in the morning. "Where are you going?" "Billings. First, then maybe further." She paused. "I wrote to the marshal there." Something settled in his face, like something confirming. "Garner watches the depot," she said, "and Victor's riders are around the main street on Friday mornings." She heard herself laying it out clinically, the way she had lived it for 3 years, as a system, as a problem with variables. "I can't get there without being stopped." "I'll be on the ridge by Thursday," Caleb said. "Victor's riders told me to leave Thursday." He paused. "But the ridge isn't far." She understood what he was not saying. "It's too dangerous," she said. "Ma'am?" His voice was quiet and certain. "So is staying." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "There's a logging trail east of the depot that runs up behind the church. Victor's men don't watch it because no stage ever ran that route." She paused. "But a horse could." "What time?" 9 o'clock, she said. "Wednesday night, at the well behind the church." She straightened. "If you're not there, I understand. This is not your—" "I'll be there," he said. She looked at him one more time. Then she turned and walked back out of the alley. She went home. She set the table for dinner. She smiled at Victor across the roasted chicken and listened to him talk about the north parcel and said yes, and of course, and I see at exactly the right intervals. And when he asked about her afternoon, she said she'd been in the garden, which was partially true. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark. She did not count the $47 this time. She counted the hours instead. 36 hours to Wednesday night. 36 hours to the well behind the church. She stared at the ceiling. Victor moved in the room down the hall. Eleanor breathed. Steady. Patient. Like a woman who has been waiting 3 years for the right moment and has finally found one. 36 hours felt like 36 years. Eleanor moved through Tuesday the way she had learned to move through all the days inside the Hale house, carefully, thoroughly, without visible urgency. She ironed linens she had already ironed. She reviewed household accounts that didn't need reviewing. She sat at dinner and answered Victor's questions, and passed the bread, and refilled his glass, and gave him absolutely nothing to read in her face, because Eleanor Whitaker had spent 3 years becoming unreadable, and she was not going to waste that particular hard-won skill now. But underneath all of it, she was counting. Not dollars this time. Hours. Victor noticed nothing, which was both a relief and a confirmation of something she had understood for a long time, that Victor paid attention to Eleanor only when he suspected she was doing something he hadn't authorized. When she behaved as expected, she became for him essentially invisible. She was furniture in his house. Functional. Expected. Unremarkable. She had spent 3 years hating that. Now she was using it. Tuesday night, Victor went to his study after dinner and did not come out until well past 10. Eleanor heard him moving through the hallway, heard the particular creak of the 3rd stair that she had memorized in the first month, heard his bedroom door close. She lay in the dark and did not move for 2 hours. At midnight, she got up. She moved to the wardrobe. She took out the winter coat, removed the $47, and tucked them back into the inside pocket of the jacket she would wear tomorrow. She took from beneath the wardrobe a small traveling bag she had been assembling for 4 months, not packing all at once, which would be noticed, but adding things gradually, one small thing at a time, the way water builds behind a dam. A change of clothes, her mother's brooch, a photograph of her father, a small Bible with Clara's address written inside the back cover. She put the bag back under the wardrobe. She went back to bed. She did not sleep. Wednesday morning came slow and certain, the way mornings come when you have been awake to meet them. Victor's Wednesday schedule was different from his other days. He had no North Parcel meeting, no regular ride. Wednesdays, he usually spent in town at the bank at Garner's office, moving through Red Hollow, the way he always moved through it, as a man reminding the town of his presence without having to announce it. This was the problem Eleanor had been sitting with since Tuesday. She had told Caleb 9 o'clock at the well behind the church, but she had not accounted for Victor being in town all day on a Wednesday, moving, circulating, occupying the spaces she needed to move through. She was working through this at the breakfast table when Victor said, "I'm riding to Clearwater today." Eleanor looked up. Clearwater was 18 miles south. A neighboring ranch, whose owner, James Pruitt, had been in a land dispute with Victor for 2 years. Victor rode to Clearwater when the dispute required his personal attention, which was not often and not predictably. "All day?" she asked, and kept her voice at exactly the pitch of mild domestic interest. "Most of it." He drank his coffee. "I'll be back for dinner." Eleanor nodded. She looked at her plate. She did not allow herself to close her eyes or exhale or do any of the things her body wanted very badly to do. "I'll have Alma make the lamb," she said. Victor left at 8. Eleanor stood at the front window and watched him ride south. Then she turned around. "Alma," she said, "I need to visit Ruth Pierce this morning. I promised to help her with the mission supply inventory." Alma did not look up from the sink. "You want Billy to walk you?" "No." She was already moving toward the stairs. "I won't be long." She went upstairs. She retrieved the traveling bag. She put it inside the larger marketing basket she used for Callaway's underneath a folded cloth. It was not invisible. But it was not immediately visible either, and Red Hollow was a town that saw what it expected to see. She went downstairs. She walked out the front door. She walked 4 blocks north, turned east, crossed behind the assay office, and came up the back path to the church. The churchyard was empty. It was 8:40 in the morning. She had 20 minutes. She sat on the stone edge of the well and set her basket beside her and put both hands in her lap and breathed. The summer heat was already pressing down, and somewhere in the direction of the main street, she could hear the ordinary sounds of Red Hollow conducting its ordinary business. A wagon, a door, someone calling across the street. And she sat inside all of it and felt very precisely the specific quality of fear that is not the fear of something happening, but the fear of something not happening. What if he wasn't there? What if Victor's men had run him out early? What if Colton Reed had done more than darken his eye in the alley? What if she was sitting at this well with $47 and a traveling bag, and nowhere to go, and no one coming, and 3 more years of Victor Hale's house stretching out in front of her like a sentence with no period? She heard boots on the path before she saw him, and then Caleb Mercer came around the side of the church with his horse on a lead rope and a pack tied across the saddle, and Eleanor Whitaker sat on the stone edge of the well and felt something release in her chest that she hadn't known she was holding. He saw her, and he stopped. "You came," she said. "Said I would." He brought the horse forward. "You ready?" She picked up her basket. "Yes." He looked at the basket. He looked at her. Something moved in his face that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one recognition maybe, or something like respect. "That's everything. That's everything." He took the basket from her without making it a gesture. Just took it and tied it behind the saddle with the efficiency of a man who spent his life securing things to horses and knew the fastest way to do it. "There's a logging trail behind the depot," he said. "You mentioned it. East side. It joins the main north road about 2 miles out." "I know the road." He checked the saddle strap. "We ride easy until we're past the mill, then we move." Dale Garner has a man who watches the south end of Main Street in the mornings. "We're not going south." He looked at her. "We're going east first, then north. Longer. But nobody's watching the mill road at 9 in the morning." Eleanor looked at him. "You planned this," she said. "Been riding this territory for 12 years, he said. "I know the ways in and out." She had never heard anything sound more like exactly what she needed. He helped her up and mounted behind her because it was faster that way, and because a man and a woman on one horse on the back roads of Red Hollow at 9 in the morning looked, if anyone saw them, like exactly nothing worth reporting. He kept the horse at a walk until they cleared the church property. Then they turned east down the narrow path behind the depot, and the sounds of Red Hollow faded behind them. And Eleanor sat in the saddle with her spine straight and her hands folded and felt the town fall away like a coat she had been wearing that was never hers to begin with. They were 2 miles out when he said quietly, "All right." "Yes," she said, and meant it for the first time in a long time. They made 4 miles before the trouble started. She heard the hooves before Caleb did, or perhaps he heard them first, and said nothing because she felt him adjust behind her, felt the subtle shift of attention that moves through a person's body when they are calculating something they don't yet want to name. "Company," he said. Just that. Eleanor turned enough to look back down the road. 2 riders. Coming fast. Her heart dropped. Not Garner. Not Victor's foreman. She didn't recognize the first man at that distance, but the second man had a particular way of sitting a horse that she would have known across any distance. "That's Colton Reed," she said. "I see him. He reports directly to Victor. If he sees me..." "He's already seen you." Caleb's voice was level. "Hold on." He put the horse into a canter. The road north curved through thick timber before it opened, and Caleb took the curve fast and then cut left off the road onto a trace that Eleanor wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't been paying exact attention. The horse moved through without breaking stride, and Caleb guided it with the ease of someone who had ridden this specific path in the dark. Behind them she heard the 2 riders hit the curve. She heard them slow. She heard one of them shout something she couldn't make out. Then the timber closed behind them, and the sound dropped away. They rode for 10 minutes through the trees at a pace that required Eleanor to hold the saddle horn, and trust the horse and trust the man behind her, which she found to her own surprise easier than it should have been after 3 years of learning not to trust anyone. When Caleb finally slowed, they were deep enough in the timber that the road behind them was entirely lost. "Will they follow?" she asked. "They'll look," he said. "But they don't know this timber like I do, and they don't know where we're going." "Where are we going?" "My camp," he said. 2 hours north, high enough that no one rides up without reason." Eleanor thought about Victor coming home from Clearwater at dinner time. She thought about Alma setting the table for the lamb. She thought about the moment Victor walked through the door and called upstairs, and no one answered. "He'll know by tonight," she said. "Yes." "He'll send riders." "Yes." "And Garner." "Yes." A pause. "That's why we're not stopping at the camp." She turned to look at him. "I've got supplies for a week," he said. "We're going to the ridge. There's a way station up their old trapper post. Nobody uses it now. We can hold there while we figure out your next move." She stared at him. "You planned for this," she said, not accusing, just understanding, arriving a beat late. "When a man tells you to leave town," Caleb said, "and you don't, you think ahead." Eleanor turned back to the trail. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There's a tin under the floorboards of the Hale cellar. 14 months of dates and notes and witness names. Can't go back for it. I know." She had known that since she put it there. She had known somewhere under everything that she would likely leave it behind. "But I wrote down the key details in the letter to Marshal Webb." "Then Webb has what he needs." If he received it. "Ruth Pierce sent it Monday," Caleb said. "I asked her Tuesday." Eleanor went still. "You spoke to Ruth?" "Stopped by the church Tuesday morning." He was quiet for a moment. "She said you'd been brave." Eleanor looked at the trail ahead. She did not have a word for what moved through her. She chose not to try. They rode in silence for a while, and the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind built between 2 people who do not need to fill every moment with sound to prove they are present. Eleanor had not experienced that quality of silence with another person in a very long time, and she felt it the way you feel the first genuinely cool air of an evening after a day of brutal heat, with something that is almost disbelief that it could be this simple. The camp was exactly as he'd described it, high, spare, functional, and invisible from the road below. He helped her down. She stood in the open air of the mountain and breathed. It was not the kind of breath she took in Red Hollow, the carefully calibrated breaths of a woman managing her own oxygen supply in proximity to danger. It was a full breath, a breath that used her whole chest. "Sit," he said. "I'll get water." "I can get water." He looked at her. "I'm not asking you to sit because you can't," he said. "I'm asking you to sit because you've been running since 9 this morning and you haven't stopped once." She sat. She watched him move around the camp with the economy of someone who lived outdoors and had arranged his life to require nothing he wasn't willing to carry. He built a small fire without making a production of it. He heated water. He produced from a pack that seemed to contain more than its outside, suggested a battered tin cup, and something that smelled remarkably like actual coffee. He handed her the cup. She held it with both hands. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "Caleb." She looked at him. "Caleb," she said. "Why are you doing this?" He sat across the fire from her and looked into it the way men look into fires when they're deciding how much of a true thing to say. "I told you," he said. "Some things are wrong." "That was the store," she said. "That was a moment. This is—" She looked at the camp, at the pack, at the 2 horses. "This is a plan. This is a week of your life, and Victor Hale's riders and a federal warrant that may or may not come through." She looked at him. "This is something else." He was quiet for a long moment. "My mother," he said finally, "was married to a man like Victor Hale." He said it without drama. The way you say a fact you have lived with long enough that it no longer has jagged edges, just wait. Different town, different name, same arrangement. He looked up from the fire. "I was 12 when she finally got out. She didn't have anyone to help her." He paused. "She made it anyway, but it cost her things she didn't have to lose." Eleanor looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." He said it gently. She lived to be 63. She was happy. He looked back at the fire. "But I've thought about it since. About what it might have taken. One person who didn't look the other way." Eleanor wrapped her hands tighter around the cup. "One person," she said. "Just one." The fire crackled. Somewhere below them, Red Hollow was doing whatever Red Hollow did when one of its arrangements broke open. She could feel it at a distance, the machinery of Victor's response beginning to move the riders, the questions, the systematic application of Hale authority to the problem of an absent wife. She did not feel afraid. She felt for the first time in 3 years the specific sensation of being on the right side of something, even if that something was still dangerous and unresolved and full of variables she couldn't control. "He'll go to Margaret first," she said. "She'll tell him to handle it quietly. No public search, too much visibility. He'll send Colton and the riders with instructions to bring me back without anyone seeing." Caleb nodded. He was listening the way he always listened. Fully. "Garner will file nothing official," she continued, "because filing something official means a record, and a record means scrutiny, and if Webb receives my letter and starts asking questions, the last thing Victor wants is a paper trail that shows he reported a missing wife." "So he keeps it informal," Caleb said. "Uses his own men." "Yes." She looked at him. "Which means we have maybe 48 hours before they're organized enough to start covering the road seriously. After that we're on the ridge," he said. "And I know the ridge better than any man Victor owns." She believed him. She believed him the way you believe someone who speaks about terrain, the way other people speak about their own bodies, not with pride, but with the matter-of-fact intimacy of long acquaintance. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "Ruth sent the letter Monday. If Webb moves fast, he could have a deputy in Red Hollow by the end of the week." She paused. "But Webb is in Billings, and Billings is 2 days by fast horse. And I don't know if he'll move fast, or if he'll move at all, or if Victor already has enough reach into the federal system to slow him down." "Then we hold until we know," Caleb said simply. "And if Webb doesn't come—" He looked at her across the fire. Then we figure out the next thing, he said. But I don't spend time worrying about what hasn't happened yet. She held his gaze. How do you do that? She asked. Not worry about what hasn't happened. He thought about it for a moment. Grew up in the mountains, he said. You plan for what you can. You can't plan for everything, so you don't try. A pause. You just stay ready. Eleanor looked down at her cup. She thought about 3 years of planning every minute of every day, cataloging every variable building, every contingency, because the cost of an unplanned moment in the Hale house was never abstract. She thought about what it would feel like to just stay ready. I'm not sure I know how to do that, she said. No, he said not unkindly. I don't reckon you've had much practice. They were quiet. The fire burned down to something smaller and steadier. Then Caleb stood. We need to move before dark, he said. I want to be at the way station before they start watching the ridge roads. Eleanor stood. She set down the cup and picked up her basket and stood for one moment in the camp in the mountain air with the fire going low, and the sound of the trees around them, and the sound of her own breathing, which was still full, still using her whole chest. Ready, he said. Yes, she said. And she meant it in more ways than she had words for. They broke camp in under 10 minutes. Caleb worked fast and without wasted motion, scattering the fire and packing the equipment and loading the horses with the practiced speed of a man who understood that a camp left too long becomes a location. Eleanor kept up with him, handing things, holding the horses, not requiring instruction. He noticed this. She saw him notice it. He said nothing, but the quality of the silence between them shifted by a degree, not warmer exactly, but more settled the way a room settles when two people have confirmed without having to say it that they can work together. They had been riding for 30 minutes when Caleb stopped. She felt the change in him before she understood the reason for it. He went still in the saddle, in the way he went still when he was processing something, and she looked where he was looking, and saw on the switchback trail below them a single rider moving upward at a deliberate pace. Not Colton Reed, not any of Victor's regular men, someone she recognized anyway. She recognized him by his hat, which had a particular dent in the left brim that she had seen across her own dinner table. That's Marsh Duffy, she said very quietly. He's Victor's cousin. He came in from Clearwater last month. She paused. He's good with a rifle. Caleb's jaw set. He came up the west face, he said, which means he knew we wouldn't come the main road. He was thinking out loud, low, unhurried. Victor called him before he rode to Clearwater this morning. Eleanor heard it at the same moment he said it. He knew, she said. He knew before he left. Or suspected. Caleb turned the horse off the trail, moving east away from Duffy's line of sight. Either way, he had coverage planned before dinner. Eleanor thought about Victor sitting across the breakfast table, talking about Clearwater, and her hands went cold in the summer heat. He let me go, she said. Maybe. He wanted to see where I ran. She heard the clarity of it settling through her like cold water. He wanted to see who I ran to. Caleb said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She had thought she was escaping. She had thought she was the one doing the planning. He's going to use this, she said. The words came out flat and precise, because she was not panicking. She was analyzing, because analysis was the only thing that had ever kept her ahead of Victor Hale, even by a step. If he finds us together, he doesn't need evidence of anything. He has a story. A wife who ran off with a drifter. A husband wronged. And every person in Red Hollow who already thinks of me as property will accept that story before he finishes the first sentence. Then we make sure he doesn't find us together, Caleb said. How? He guided the horse through the timber, keeping it slow and quiet. Duffy's above the west trail. Colton will be coming up the north road by now. That leaves the ridge route. It's steep, but I've taken it twice this year. He paused. It comes out above the way station instead of below it. Different approach. If they're watching the station from below, they won't see us come in from above. And if they're watching from above, he glanced at her. Then we deal with that when we get there, he said. Eleanor looked at the timber around them. She thought about Duffy's rifle. She thought about Victor at Clearwater waiting, letting her run her plan out, watching from a distance, the way he watched everything with patience, with certainty, with the absolute confidence of a man who believed he had already won. She thought about a letter in a minister's mission post to Billings, Montana. She thought about a marshal named Aldous Webb, who her father had called an honest man. "How long to the ridge route?" she asked. 2 hours. Maybe less if we push." "Then push," she said. Caleb looked at her for just a moment. Then he put the horse into a canter. They moved through the timber fast and low, the horse working hard on the uneven ground, and Eleanor leaned forward and held the saddle horn and did not look back. She heard once something that might have been a voice on the trail below, a shout, or a bird, or her own fear making sounds, and she did not slow down to determine which. An hour into the ride, with the ridge above them and Duffy's trail behind them and the summer sun moving hard toward afternoon, Caleb pulled up short. "Hold," he said. She held. He listened. She listened. Below them, far below now, she heard horses, more than two. The sound of several riders on the main north road, moving fast, moving with the purposeful rhythm of men who had been given a specific destination. "Colton brought more," she said. 5, maybe 6. He listened another beat. "They're heading for the station. They know where it is. Somebody does." He was quiet, then low. "There's only one person in Red Hollow who knows about that station besides me." Eleanor thought. "Old Garrett," she said. "The trapper you bought supplies from last spring. Garrett drinks at the Hale Saloon." He said it without bitterness. Just fact. The fact of a system. Victor would have asked everyone who knows that ridge. Eleanor looked at the trail ahead of them. The ridge route. Steep and unfamiliar, and above a way station that was now compromised, and behind her, Victor's riders moving fast toward the exact location Caleb had planned to bring her. "We can't go to the station," she said. "No." "Then where?" He was quiet for a moment that lasted exactly long enough for Eleanor's heart to do something specific and sustained. "There's one more place," he said. "Higher than the station. Old surveyor's post from when the railroad ran their lines through here in 1871. Nobody's used it in years. Garrett doesn't know about it. I found it myself 3 winters ago." He looked at her. "It's a hard ride. Last 2 miles are on foot." Eleanor straightened in the saddle. "I can walk 2 miles, she said. Something moved in his face. That thing adjacent to a smile. "I know you can," he said. They turned toward the ridge. Below them in the valley, Red Hollow was conducting Victor's search with all the organized efficiency of a system designed to reclaim what it considered its own. Above them, the mountain waited with the indifferent patience of something that had been there long before Victor Hale, and would be there long after. Eleanor rode toward it with her jaw set and her hand steady and $47 in her pocket, and the name Aldous Webb like a small lamp in the dark. She had not come this far to be reclaimed. She had not survived 3 years inside a system built to break her to fold, now on a mountain with a man who refused to look the other way, and a plan that was still barely narrowly, but genuinely intact. She looked at the ridge above her. She thought about freedom. Not the word she had kept in the dark, the actual thing, close enough now to have a shape, close enough to ride toward. She rode. The last 2 miles were on foot exactly as Caleb had said. He tied the horses to a pine stand below the snow line and took the pack off the saddle, and Eleanor took her basket, and they walked. The ground was steep and uneven, and the summer heat that had pressed down on Red Hollow all week thinned out up here into something cleaner, something that had edges to it, and Eleanor walked with her head down and her breath working, and did not complain, and did not slow down, and did not ask how much farther. She knew how much farther. She could see the ridge. Caleb walked beside her and slightly ahead, reading the ground the way she had learned to read Victor's face constantly automatically, with the specific attention of someone for whom missing a detail has consequences. He moved branches without being asked. He pointed out loose rock without making it a lesson. He was, she thought, the most quietly competent person she had ever been in proximity to, and the competence was not performed, which made it more settling rather than less. They did not talk on the climb. There was an understanding between them now that had stopped requiring words for most things, and Eleanor found this extraordinary, given that she had known him less than a week. She had spent 3 years in a house with Victor Hale, and had never achieved anything close to this kind of functional honesty. She thought about that while she climbed. She thought about what it meant that ease with a near stranger felt more real than 3 years with a husband. The surveyor's post was small and low, and built into the rock face in a way that made it almost invisible until you were standing at the door. Caleb had been right. It was not a comfortable place. It was a functional one. 4 walls, a roof that had held a stone floor, a rusted iron stove that still drew, and a narrow window cut into the east-facing wall that looked out over the valley below, with a range of visibility that made Eleanor catch her breath. She could see Red Hollow from here. Not the buildings clearly, but the shape of the valley, the road running north, the glint of the river. She could see the way station below them on the ridge, and she could see moving around its perimeter the small dark shapes of riders. 5 of them, just as Caleb had said. "They're already there," she said. "Been there an hour, maybe." He was building a fire in the iron stove. Small, smokeless wood. He had carried it up from the lower timber. "They'll search it, not find anything, and then Colton will have to decide whether to push higher or report back." "Colton pushes higher," she said. "He doesn't report failure." Caleb looked at her. "You know his habits," he said. "I know everyone's habits in that town." She watched the riders below. "I had nothing else to do for 3 years but watch." He said nothing to that. He finished the fire and stood and came to the window and looked down at the riders. "They'll make the station by morning," he said. "We've got tonight." "To do what?" "Wait." Eleanor looked at him. "For Webb," he said. "Your letter went Monday. Today's Wednesday. A fast rider makes billings in 2 days. If Webb moved when he got it." "That's a great many ifs," she said. "It is." He didn't soften it. She appreciated that. "But it's what we have." She turned back to the window. Below them, Colton Reed's riders circled the way station like something that hadn't found its shape yet. She watched the smallest figure, the one on the gray horse, dismount and go to the station door, and she knew without being able to see his face that it was Colton, because Colton was always the one who went first. Victor had built him that way, useful, loyal, and just ambitious enough to stay dangerous to everyone except the man paying him. "Victor told him something before he left this morning," she said. "Something specific. Not just find her. Find her and bring her back would mean Colton runs her down on the road. What he's doing now." She watched the rider move around the station perimeter. "He's looking for something. Something Victor told him to look for." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Evidence," he said. She looked at him. "If Victor knows about Webb," Caleb said slowly, "or suspects you wrote to someone, he'd want to recover anything you sent. Any letters, any documentation." "The tin is still in the cellar," she said. "He can find that. That's fine. I wrote the key details to Webb directly." "What about the letters you wrote from Ruth's?" Cold moved through her. "Ruth sent them Monday," she said. "They'd be 2 days out by now." "By mail?" Caleb said. "Regular mission circuit." "Yes." He looked at her. "If Victor got to this mission post before it went out," he said, "if he intercepted it, he would need to know about it." She heard her own voice getting very controlled, the way it got when she was working through something she didn't want to be true. Ruth wouldn't have told anyone. She wouldn't have needed to. He said it carefully, not cruelly. "Victor manages the post office. He manages the stage. If anyone on the mission circuit recognized the Hale household name on a return address..." Eleanor stopped. She had signed the letters Eleanor Whitaker, not Eleanor Hale, but the return address Ruth had suggested was the church. And Victor Hale donated to the church fund, and Roy Calloway's brother ran the mission circuit mail exchange. She pressed her hand flat against the window frame. "He may have them," she said. "May." Caleb's voice was steady. "We don't know. If he has them, Webb never got the letter. Webb doesn't know who I am or why I wrote." She worked through it out loud, because working through it out loud was faster than doing it alone inside her own head. "And I have no documentation. The tin is in the cellar, and Victor can say those notes mean anything he wants them to mean, and there's no federal record of any correspondence." "Except what you can say yourself," Caleb said, "to a marshal in person." "I have to get to Billings." "Yes, and Victor's riders are between us and every road." "Not every road." He turned from the window. "There's a pass on the north face. Comes down on the far side of the valley, 8 miles from any road Victor's men are watching. It's not a pleasant ride." "I don't need pleasant," Eleanor said. He looked at her steadily. "It's not safe either," he said. "North face is loose rock in the summer. Horses can manage the lower part. The upper section is on foot. We already walked 2 miles. This would be 4. On broken ground. After dark." She met his eyes. "When do we leave?" she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he went to the pack and started pulling items out with quiet efficiency, and Eleanor understood that this was his answer. They left at sunset. She had eaten. Caleb had produced dried meat and hard biscuit from the pack with the same no-ceremony competence he applied to everything. And she had rested for 2 hours, not sleeping, but close to it, sitting with her back against the stone wall, and her hands in her lap, and her mind doing the thing it did now, which was not planning exactly, but staying ready the way he had described it. Watching for the next thing without trying to invent it prematurely. The horses carried them as far as the base of the north face, and then Caleb secured them to a rock outcropping with enough rope to graze and enough shelter to stay calm. And he took the smaller pack, and Eleanor took her basket, and they began the climb. The dark on the mountain was different from the dark in Red Hollow. In Red Hollow, dark was the absence of light. Up here, dark was its own thing, layered and textured, and full of sound. The creak of rock cooling the movement of wind through the upper timber, somewhere far below, the faint, impossible-to-locate sound of water. Eleanor walked with one hand occasionally touching rock for balance, and her eyes adjusting slowly, and her breath working steadily, and she did not think about Victor or Colton, or the way station, or the letters. She thought about each step, just the step in front of her. Caleb moved slightly ahead and to her right close enough that she could track him by sound far enough that he wasn't guiding her. There was respect in that distance. She registered it without naming it. They were an hour into the climb when the loose rock happened. She felt it before she could stop it, a section of ground that had held on the way up and did not hold the same way on the diagonal traverse. And her right foot went sideways, and she went with it, and she had one fast moment of pure physical fear before Caleb's hand closed around her arm, and she was upright. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. He held until she had her footing, then he let go. She breathed. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Same tone he used for everything. Not dismissive, just present. She took the next step, then the next. Another hour, and they crested the north face, and the valley on the far side opened below them wide and black and still, and Eleanor stood at the top and felt the wind come off it, and thought there without any more words than that. There. The descent took 40 minutes. The ground on this side was more stable, the grade more forgiving, and by the time they reached the base, the horses Caleb had described left here 3 days ago, he said. When he'd ridden out to plan this, because he had been planning this while he was still sitting on the steps of the Dutton boarding house drinking coffee on Saturday morning, were waiting in a hollow calm and ready. Eleanor looked at the horses. She looked at him. "Saturday," she said. "You left horses here on Saturday." "Saturday afternoon." He was already checking the saddle straps. "After I spoke to you at the well." She stood very still. "You planned the whole thing in an afternoon," she said. "Had the bones of it." He looked up. "You filled in the pieces." She did not know what to say to that. She said, "You could have just left, gone back to the ridge. It wasn't your problem." He looked at her across the saddle in the dark. "Eleanor," he said. It was the first time he had used her name, not ma'am, her name. "It was my problem," he said, "from the minute I walked into that store." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and mounted. They rode north through the dark, staying off the main road, moving through the valley's east edge, on a path that Caleb knew. The way he knew everything up here, not by landmark, but by feel, by the memory of the ground itself. Eleanor rode beside him now, not behind him, because they were past the mountain and into country that allowed it, and the change in arrangement felt significant in a way she didn't examine too closely. They rode for 2 hours before she heard something. She heard it, and her hand went to Caleb's arm without thinking. He stopped. They both listened. Ahead of them on the road, the main north road, which they had been angling toward as the valley widened, she heard horses. Multiple horses. Moving south. Moving fast. Not Victor's riders. Victor's riders went north on the main road. Riders moving south fast in the dark were riders coming from somewhere. Riders coming from Billings. Caleb looked at her. She looked at him. "Webb," she said. And the word came out as barely more than a breath, because she was afraid to say it at full volume, in case saying it broke something. "We don't know that," he said. But he was already moving the horse toward the road. Eleanor moved with him. They came out of the tree line onto the main road, and Caleb raised one hand high and clear, visible in the moonlight, and the riders ahead slowed. There were 4 of them. 3 wore the plain dark coats of working men. The 4th wore a badge that caught the moonlight. He was a big man, heavier than Caleb, with a gray mustache and the bearing of someone who had been a lawman long enough that authority had stopped being a thing he put on and become a thing he simply was. He rode forward from the group and looked at them with eyes that were doing their own calculation. "I'm looking for Eleanor Hale," he said. "Previously Whitaker. Daughter of Thomas Whitaker, formerly of Clearwater County." Eleanor stepped her horse forward. "I'm Eleanor Whitaker," she said. She did not say Hale. The marshal looked at her for a long moment. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Aldous Webb. Your father was a good man." He paused. "I got your letter Monday evening. Rode out Tuesday." Eleanor felt something happen in her chest that she was not prepared for. Not relief exactly. Larger than that. The feeling of something enormous that you have been holding with both hands for a very long time, finally being held by someone else as well. Her eyes went hot. She did not let them do anything else. "He may have intercepted the letters I sent," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. She was proud of it. "The documentation I had in Red Hollow is inaccessible. I have your letter," Webb said. "That's enough to open a federal inquiry." He looked at Caleb. "You the one who helped her out?" "Caleb Mercer," Caleb said. "Mountain trapper." Webb studied him for a moment. "Victor Hale's people are filing a complaint with Garner about a kidnapping." "No surprise," Caleb said. "No." Webb agreed. "It's not." He looked at Eleanor. "You're willing to make a statement, in writing, under oath?" "Everything I know," she said. "All of it." Webb nodded. He turned to one of the 3 men behind him and said something low, and the man turned his horse and moved south at a canter. Webb turned back. "I'm sending my deputy ahead to Red Hollow," he said. "Official notice of federal inquiry. Hale can't touch the investigation once it's officially opened." He paused. "It doesn't mean he can't touch other things. He'll know by morning that you found me." "He expected that eventually," Eleanor said. "Yes?" Webb looked at her carefully. "You seem clear about how he thinks." "I've had 3 years of practice," she said. Something moved through Webb's expression. Not pity, something more considered than that. "We'll ride to Billings tonight," he said. "I have a safe house there, used it before for similar situations." He said it matter-of-factly, which told her this was not the first time Webb had ridden through the dark toward a woman who needed federal jurisdiction between herself and a man who owned a town. Can you ride? I've been riding all night, Eleanor said. Webb almost smiled. Let's move then. They rode. 4 miles from Billings, with the sky beginning to lighten at its eastern edge and the horses working steadily through the last of the dark, Caleb rode up alongside Eleanor and matched her pace. She looked at him. He looked at her. Webb's good, he said. Your father had good judgment. He did. She paused. In most things. What's in Billings after? She thought about Clara's address in the back of the Bible. She thought about Colorado. My cousin, she said. And after that, she stopped. She had never let herself think past the immediate problem, past the next step. I don't know yet. He nodded. They rode in silence for another mile. Then she said, What about you? He looked at her. Back to the ridge, he said. After I've given Webb my statement. She looked ahead at the road. That's a lonely life, she said. She said it carefully, not accusing, not asking for anything, just saying the thing that was true. It's a quiet one, he said. There's a difference. He was silent for a moment. Yes, he said. There is. She looked at him again. He was looking at the road. She looked at the road too. They rode into the gray pre-dawn light side by side, and Eleanor did not try to name what was moving between them, because naming things prematurely was how you lost them, and she had already lost enough. She had time. For the first time in 3 years, she had time. The safe house in Billings was a plain building on a quiet street run by a woman named Frances, who had short gray hair in a no-nonsense manner, and who took one look at Eleanor and said, Bath first, statement after. That's how we do it here. Eleanor almost laughed. It had been a long time since anyone had ordered her to do something kind. She bathed. She changed. She sat at a plain table across from Aldous Webb, with a cup of real coffee and a deputy's pen, and she talked for 2.5 hours. She told him everything. She told him about the 14 months of notes in the cellar tin about the dates and the names, and the 3 men who had been present for specific events and had said nothing. She told him about Garner and the judge and the bank and the post office. She told him about Margaret Hale and Colton Reed and what they were inside the system Victor had built and what they did. She told him about the store. She told him about a man who said, "Let go of her arm." Webb wrote it all down. He did not express sympathy or outrage. He wrote it down with the steady attention of someone who understood that the documentation was the point that feelings were not what would get Victor Hale in front of a federal judge, but specific facts with specific dates and specific names would. When she was done, he set down his pen. "The tin," he said, "still in the cellar. He may have it by now." Can he destroy it? She thought. He won't, not immediately. He'll want to examine it first, understand what I knew and who I'd told. Victor doesn't destroy things before he understands them. Webb nodded. Then I'll have a warrant for that cellar before he makes up his mind. He stood. He put out his hand. Eleanor shook it. "Your father called me honest," Webb said. "I try to earn that." "You rode through this night," Eleanor said. "You've earned it." He left. Eleanor sat at the plain table with her coffee and listened to the sounds of a town she had never been to before, and felt very precisely the specific sensation of a system that had been built around her for 3 years, beginning not collapsing, not yet. It was too early for that, but beginning at its foundation to crack. Caleb was in the front room when she came out. He was sitting with his hat in his hands, and when she came in, he stood, and the look on his face was the one she had started to recognize as his way of asking a question without asking it. "Good," he said. "Good," she said. He nodded. She sat in the chair across from him. They were both very tired. "Frances says there are rooms," Eleanor said, "if you need to rest before you ride back." "I might take her up on that." He looked at his hat. "I need to give Webb my statement first." "Of course." A silence settled. Not the comfortable kind exactly, a different kind. The kind that happens between two people who have been through something together and are now on the other side of it and are not entirely sure how to be on the other side of it with each other. "Caleb," she said. He looked up. "If I wrote to you," she said, "from wherever I end up, would you—" She stopped. She looked at her hands. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I just want you to know that you can be found, if someone wanted to find you." He was quiet for a long moment. "I check the post at Clearwater every 6 weeks," he said. "Give or take." She looked up. He was looking at her. "Clearwater," she said. "Yes." She held his eyes. And then, because 3 years of captivity had not taken everything from her, had not taken her father's stubbornness or her mother's humor, or the particular quality of hope she had kept alive in the dark with $47 and a stage schedule and a cousin's address, she smiled. Not the smile she had worn at Victor's table. A real one. Caleb Mercer looked at Eleanor Whitaker, and something in his face did the thing adjacent to a smile. Outside, Billings was waking up. Inside the safe house on the quiet street, 2 people who had survived something sat across from each other in the early morning light, and neither of them spoke, and neither of them needed to, and that was its own kind of answer to a question that hadn't been asked yet, but was there patient and clear, waiting for the right moment. Which would come? Eleanor was certain of it. She had learned to be certain of very few things, but she was certain of that. Francis brought breakfast at 7. Eleanor ate. She ate everything on the plate, which was something she had not done at a meal in 3 years, because meals at the Hale table required a particular kind of vigilance that made hunger secondary. Here, there was no one watching the speed at which she lifted her fork. There was no one monitoring whether she spoke before she was spoken to, or sat at the correct angle, or expressed the appropriate appreciation for food she had not chosen. She ate. She drank the coffee. She set down the cup. Then she heard the front door. Not Caleb. She knew Caleb's step. Now she had learned it on the mountain in the dark, the way you learn sounds that mean safety. This was Webb's deputy, the young one he'd sent ahead to Red Hollow last night. She heard his voice in the front room, heard Webb's response, heard the particular quality of silence that follows news that changes the shape of a room. She set down her fork and walked to the doorway. The deputy was dusty from the road and looked like a man who had ridden hard and arrived with something he wasn't sure how to carry. "Mrs. Whitaker," Webb said, seeing her. He did not tell her to sit down. He'd figured out in 2.5 hours of taking her statement that Eleanor Whitaker was not a woman who received news better sitting down. Hale moved faster than I expected. "Tell me," she said. Webb looked at the deputy, who took a breath and said, "When I arrived in Red Hollow this morning with the notice of federal inquiry, Mr. Hale was already at Garner's office. He had his lawyer with him. Man named Pruitt came in from Helena overnight." Helena. Eleanor's mind moved fast. Helena was the territorial capital. A lawyer from Helena meant Victor had sent for him before she left, before Wednesday morning, before she walked out the front door. He knew, she said, not surprise, confirmation. The lawyer filed a counter-complaint before I could post the federal notice. The deputy continued. Kidnapping, theft of household property, abandonment. He paused. And one more thing. Eleanor waited. He's claiming the letter you sent to Marshal Webb was fraudulent, that you were mentally compromised, and that the letter represents the actions of a woman under undue influence from an outside party. The deputy looked briefly uncomfortable. Meaning Mercer. The room was very quiet. Eleanor heard her own breathing. She heard distantly Billings waking up outside the window. He planned this from the beginning, she said. Not just letting me run, the whole thing. He wanted me to run to Caleb. He wanted there to be a man. She said it clearly, because clarity was the only tool she had left, and she intended to use it. Because a wife who runs to a federal marshal is a legal problem. A wife who runs to a man is a story, and stories are easier to control than federal inquiries. Webb looked at her steadily. Yes, he said, that's what he's doing. Can it work? Webb was quiet for a moment. A careful man. She had learned to read careful men differently than she read Victor. Victor's carefulness was calculation. Webb's carefulness was honesty, and honesty sometimes included things you didn't want to hear. The mental compromise claim needs a doctor's testimony, he said. Victor would need a physician willing to support it. In Helena, with a territorial judge. He paused. It's not impossible, if the right people are willing. They're willing, Eleanor said. Victor has reach into the territorial system. I told you about the judge in Red Hollow. That judge has a cousin in Helena. Webb's jaw tightened. Then we need your documentation, he said. The tin. He has it by now. Maybe. Webb turned to his deputy. Did you see Hale's men at the house? Colton Reed was in the yard when I rode past, the deputy said. Couldn't see inside. Webb turned back to Eleanor. Is there anything in that tin he can use against you? She thought. She had spent 14 months filling that tin. Every entry had been specific, dated, factual. She had written it the way her father had taught her to write accounts, without emotion, without interpretation, just what happened and when and who was present. No, she said, but he can destroy it now, and without it my statement is the only record. Your statement is under federal oath, Webb said, and his lawyer will argue I'm mentally compromised. She heard her voice do something that was not quite bitterness and not quite calm, but lived in the territory between them. A woman alone against a man with a Helena lawyer and a territorial judge's cousin. Webb said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that which would make it untrue. Caleb appeared in the hallway behind the deputy. He had given his statement and rested 2 hours and come back looking the way he always looked, present, quiet, already reading the room's temperature. He looked at Eleanor's face. What happened? He said. She told him. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not make a sound that was either reassurance or alarm. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, The 3 witnesses. She looked at him. You mentioned them in your statement, he said. 3 men who were present for specific events and said nothing. Do you know where they are? 2 of them still work for Victor, she said. Useless. The 3rd? She thought. Pete Danvers. He drove the Hale wagon for 2 years. He left Red Hollow last spring. Victor said he was let go for drinking. She paused. He wasn't. Pete saw something he shouldn't have seen, and Victor gave him money to leave quietly. Caleb looked at Webb. A paid witness, Webb said carefully. Victor gave him money to disappear. That means Hale paid to suppress a witness, which is obstruction. If Danvers is willing to say that, where is he? Caleb said to Eleanor. He mentioned a sister in Deer Lodge, she said. He used to talk about her. Said if he ever left Red Hollow, he'd go there. Webb was already looking at his deputy. Deer Lodge is 6 hours. I can make it in 5, the deputy said. Go, Webb said. The deputy went. Eleanor stood in the kitchen of the safe house in Billings and watched the door close and felt the pieces of the next thing assembling themselves in the space where the last crisis had just been, and thought not for the first time that surviving Victor Hale had made her extraordinarily good at living inside uncertainty without being swallowed by it. He's going to move before the deputy gets back, she said. Yes, Webb said. He'll come here. He'll try. Webb pulled his coat off the chair and put it on. He has no jurisdiction in Billings. Neither does his Helena lawyer. But that doesn't mean he won't try to resolve this outside of jurisdiction. Eleanor understood what that meant. Victor resolving things outside of jurisdiction looked like a conversation in an alley behind the feed store. Like 3 men surrounding 1 man on a road with instructions to make a point. She looked at Caleb. Caleb was looking at the door. How many men does he travel with? Caleb said to Eleanor. Colton and 2 riders usually, she said. If he brought the Helena lawyer, they may have brought more. She thought about Marsh Duffy and his rifle and the West Trail, and felt something cold move through her that she recognized as not fear, but readiness. He won't come himself. Not initially. He'll send Colton. To do what? Here in Billings. "To talk to me," she said. "That's always how it starts. A conversation. Victor is very good at conversations." Caleb looked at Webb. "I'll have 2 deputies on the street," Webb said. "Hale's men touch anyone they're in federal custody." "That'll stop Colton," Caleb said. "But not Victor," Eleanor said. Both men looked at her. She sat down at the kitchen table. She was thinking. She was thinking about Victor at a dinner party mentioning in a pleasant voice that he had concerns about a man's accounting, and that man ending up in jail. She was thinking about the architecture of control, not the violence, not the overt threats, but the quiet systemic pressure applied at precisely the right points. She was thinking about Margaret Hale saying systems don't collapse alone, they collapse together. And she was thinking about what that meant, applied in the other direction. "He's going to try to get to me directly," she said. "Not physically, legally. His lawyer will push for an immediate hearing before a territorial judge who owes the Hale family. The mental compromise claim. If he gets me in front of that judge before Webb finds Danvers, he won't get a federal witness in front of a territorial judge," Webb said. "My inquiry supersedes. Unless the territorial judge claims jurisdiction first." She looked at Webb. "Is there a judge in Billings?" Webb went very still. She saw him think. She saw the moment he understood what she was saying. "Judge Horace Callum," he said slowly. "He and Victor Hale are." "My husband contributed substantially to Judge Callum's last election campaign," Eleanor said. "I handled the household accounts. I wrote the bank drafts." Webb closed his eyes for 1 second. "He's already in Billings," Eleanor said. "I think he was already in Billings before I left Red Hollow. I think that's where Victor went Wednesday. Not Clearwater." She heard the whole plan assembling in her mind with the clarity of something she should have seen earlier. "He rode to Billings. He met with Callum. He set up the legal mechanism before he let me walk out the door." The kitchen was very quiet. Caleb said, "How long before Callum can convene a hearing?" 24 hours, Webb said. His voice had gone tight. "With Hale's lawyer filing the petition." "He may have already filed it," Eleanor said. "Last night, while I was giving my statement." Webb stood up. "I need to make some inquiries," he said, and walked out of the kitchen with the particular speed of a man who has realized he is behind by a move and is trying to recalculate. Eleanor sat at the table. Caleb sat down across from her. They looked at each other. "He's very good at this," she said. And she heard the exhaustion in her voice, not despair, just the long, specific fatigue of 3 years of being outmaneuvered by someone with more resources and more patience and more system, and still getting up and still moving and still planning the next thing. "He's not done it before, though," Caleb said. She looked at him. "Controlling a town is one thing," Caleb said. "He's done that for 30 years. This is different. This is federal. Webb is outside his system." He leaned forward slightly. "And Callum might be his man, but Callum's only one judge. Federal inquiry has weight Callum can't override without making his own exposure worse." "Victor knows all of that," she said. "Yes." Caleb's voice was steady. "But knowing it and stopping it aren't the same thing." She held his eyes. She breathed. "Pete Danvers," she said. "Yes," he said. "Pete Danvers." An hour later, Colton Reed knocked on the front door of the safe house. Francis answered it. Eleanor heard his voice from the kitchen, polished, reasonable, explaining that he was looking for Mrs. Hale on behalf of her husband, who was very concerned for her welfare. Francis said she didn't know anyone by that name. Colton said he had reason to believe otherwise. Francis said he was welcome to take it up with the federal marshal whose office was 2 blocks east. A silence. Then Colton's boots on the porch steps going away. Eleanor let out a breath. Caleb from the doorway said, "He'll be back." "I know." She stood. "I need to do something." He waited. "I need to write a second statement," she said. "Everything I know about Victor's arrangement with Judge Callum. The bank drafts, the election contributions, the dates." She looked at Caleb. If Victor is planning to use Callum to override Webb's inquiry, then Callum's relationship with Victor needs to be part of the federal record before any hearing happens. You remember the dates? I wrote every bank draft for 3 years, she said. I remember every number. Something moved in Caleb's face that was not the adjacent to a smile thing. It was actual. He looked at her like she was something he was only now understanding the full dimensions of. Then write it down, he said. She wrote for 90 minutes. Webb came back twice to ask specific questions, and each time she answered without pausing. Because the numbers were there, they had always been there, filed in the part of her mind she had used as a vault for the things Victor thought she wasn't noticing. She had noticed everything. She had written down what she could reach and memorized what she couldn't. And now she opened the memory and wrote it onto Webb's paper in a clear, steady hand that did not shake. When she was done, Webb read it for 10 minutes without looking up. Then he looked up. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "I need to send a wire to the U.S. Attorney's office in Helena." "Do it," she said. "This goes beyond the domestic situation," he said carefully. "What you've written here, the election contributions, the bank involvement, this is corruption at the county level, maybe higher." "I know what it is," she said. He studied her. "You've been building this for a long time," he said, not accusing, understanding. 3 years, she said. "I didn't know when I'd need it. I just knew I would." Webb stood. "I'll be an hour," he said. "Don't answer the door." He left. Francis locked it behind him. Eleanor sat back in her chair and felt the strange hollow sensation of having emptied something she had been carrying for a very long time. It wasn't lightness. It was more like the feeling of a muscle finally releasing after it's been clenched so long you've forgotten it wasn't always tight. Caleb came and sat across from her. "You all right?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me when it's finished." He nodded. He understood that. The wait was the hardest part. It was always the hardest part. 2 hours after Webb left, Colton Reed came back. This time, he had 2 men with him and a paper in his hand that he told Francis was a territorial writ. Francis told him she would need to see the marshal before she could accept any documents. Colton told her the writ superseded the marshal's authority in a domestic matter. Francis told him the marshal had left instructions. This exchange lasted approximately 3 minutes. Then it stopped because Webb's deputy appeared at the end of the street and he was not alone. He had a man with him. Older, thick-built, with the walk of someone who had spent years doing physical work and carried the history of it in his body. He was wearing a coat that was slightly too warm for the weather and holding his hat in both hands with the particular nervousness of a man who has been found where he was hiding and is still deciding whether being found is a good thing. Eleanor watched from the front window. She would not have recognized Pete Danvers on a normal day. She had seen him perhaps a dozen times over 2 years, always at a distance, always in the context of wagon work or yard labor. He was not someone Victor had ever considered relevant enough to introduce, but she recognized the nervous way he stood. She recognized it because she had stood that way herself once, at the door of a church in Red Hollow, trying to decide if Ruth Pierce could be trusted. Caleb appeared at her shoulder. "That's your witness," he said. "Yes," she said. "I think it is." Colton Reed saw the deputy and the man and went very still. Then he said something to his 2 riders that Eleanor couldn't hear from the window, and the 3 of them turned and walked back toward the main street. And Colton's particular way of walking, unhurried, managed, controlled, was the same as Victor's particular way of talking. The walk of a man who has just recalculated. Not retreating, recalculating. Webb came back 40 minutes later with a wire in his hand and an expression that Eleanor categorized carefully as controlled satisfaction. The face of a man who has just received information that changes the weight distribution of a situation. U.S. Attorney's Office is opening a parallel inquiry, he said. Corruption at the county level, potential territorial involvement. He set the wire on the table. Judge Callum has been notified that he is a subject of that inquiry. which means he cannot preside over any hearing involving Victor Hale or any party associated with him. Eleanor looked at the wire. His leverage, she said. Gone, Webb said. For now. Victor will find another judge. He'll try. Webb sat down. But every judge he approaches becomes a potential witness to obstruction. His lawyer in Helena will tell him to stop. And lawyers in Helena charge enough per hour that Victor will listen. Pete Danvers was brought in through the back. He sat across from Webb at the kitchen table and held his hat in his lap and looked at Eleanor with the eyes of a man who has been carrying something heavy and has been offered the chance to set it down and is not entirely sure the person offering is real. Mrs. Hale, he said. Whitaker, she said quietly. Eleanor Whitaker. He nodded. He understood that. Mr. Danvers, Webb said, I need you to tell me what you saw, specifically, in the Hale house during the time you worked there. Pete looked at his hat. He was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor watched him and did not speak because she understood. She understood better than almost anything, the specific internal negotiation of a person deciding whether to say the true thing out loud when they have been silent about it for a long time. He paid me $400, Pete said, to leave and not come back and not say what I saw. What did you see? Webb said. Pete Danvers told him. He told him about a November morning 18 months ago. He told him about the yard, about what he had seen through the kitchen window, about what he had heard about the specific nature of what Victor Hale was doing, and what Eleanor was not able to do to stop it. He told it plainly, without drama, the way a man tells a thing he has had to live with. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Webb wrote it down. Pete Danvers signed it. Then Pete looked at Eleanor and said, I should have said something then, I know that. He paused. I was afraid of him. I know, Eleanor said. So was I. He looked at his hat. Is it enough? He asked. Not to Eleanor, to Webb. Combined with Mrs. Whitaker's statement and the financial records, Webb said, yes, it's enough to indict. The word landed in the kitchen like something physical. Indict. Eleanor had spent 3 years saying the word freedom in the dark, where Victor couldn't hear it. She had never let herself say the word indict because it had felt too large, too final, too much like wanting something she couldn't afford to want and lose. She said it now, silently, to herself. Indict. It sounded like something real. Webb stood. I'm going to need you both to stay in Billings for the next few days. There will be more questions. A formal deposition. He looked at Eleanor. And I need to warn you, when this becomes public record, which it will, Hale's lawyer will make it difficult. The mental compromise claim won't survive a federal deposition, but he'll use it in other ways. He'll try to control the story, Eleanor said. Yes, he's very good at that, she said. He's been doing it for 30 years. She looked at Webb steadily. But stories are harder to control when the person they're about is standing in front of a federal judge telling her own version. Webb looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. They are. He left. The house settled. Frances made more coffee. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with Caleb across from her and Pete Danvers in the corner, quietly asking Frances if there was bread. And outside, Billings moved through its ordinary afternoon, and somewhere down the road toward Red Hollow, Victor Hale was in a room with a Helena lawyer being told that the ground had shifted in ways that $400 and a county judge could no longer fix. He'll come himself now, Eleanor said. Caleb looked at her. Not Colton, she said. Not his riders. Victor. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. When the systems fail, he comes himself. It's the only other mode he has. Let him, Caleb said. He'll be reasonable, she said. He's always reasonable. He'll come to the door, and he'll be polite, and he'll say something that sounds like concern, and underneath it, he'll be applying pressure at every point he can still reach. She paused. He'll try to talk to me alone. He won't get that, Caleb said. No, she agreed. He won't." They were quiet. Then Caleb said, "What do you want to happen, not legally, after?" She looked at him. "I want to go to Colorado," she said. "I want to see my cousin. I want to sleep somewhere for more than 2 hours at a time without listening for footsteps in the hall." She paused. "I want to eat a whole plate of food at a table where no one is watching how I do it." "You did that this morning," he said. She almost laughed. "I did," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "And after Colorado," he said. She looked at him across the table. "I don't know," she said. "For the first time in a long time, I genuinely don't know what comes next." She paused. "I spent 3 years knowing exactly what would happen every day and spending all my energy surviving it. I don't know what it feels like to not already know." "It feels like this," he said. She looked at him. "Uncertain," he said. "And possible." She held his eyes. The door knocked. Not the front door. The side door, which meant it was Webb's man and not Colton. It was Webb's other deputy, and he had a telegram in his hand, and he said, "Marshall says you should read this." Eleanor took it. She read it. She read it again. She set it on the table and looked at it for a moment, and then looked at Caleb. "Victor withdrew the counter-complaint," she said. Her voice came out very quiet. Not because she was suppressing it, because quiet was all it had room to be. Caleb looked at the telegram. "His lawyer advised it," she said. "The U.S. Attorney's inquiry, the corruption angle. If Victor presses the kidnapping claim, it opens him to cross-examination under federal oath about his relationship with Callum. His lawyer told him the exposure is worse than the alternative." She looked up. "He withdrew it." Caleb was still. "He's not done," she said. "I know him. He's not done. He'll find another way." She pressed her palm flat on the table. But he blinked. He made the first retreat. Caleb looked at her, and Eleanor Whitaker, who had spent 3 years learning to keep her face still and her voice level and her hope hidden, let something happen that she had not allowed in the presence of another person since before she understood what kind of man she had married. Her eyes went bright. She did not look away. She did not apologize for it. She sat at a table in Billings, Montana, with $47 still in her jacket pocket, and a federal inquiry in motion, and a witness statement signed, and a Helena lawyer advising retreat. And she looked at a mountain cowboy who had walked into a store and said 2 words and changed the composition of the air. And she let herself feel with her whole chest what it meant to have gotten here. Not just the legal fact of it, the actual fact of it. She was out. She was safe. She had done it, not alone. She had not done it alone. But she had done it. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah," he said, softly. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, directly, without performance, like she was a person in a room who deserved to be looked at. "Thank you," he said back. She understood what he meant. She understood that he was thanking her for being the kind of woman who could walk through 3 years of that and come out the other side with her name still intact and her voice still her own, and enough courage left to sit across from a federal marshal and say all of it out loud. She understood he meant it, and that he meant it was its own kind of thing. 3 days later, Victor Hale was served with a federal indictment on charges of domestic criminal conduct, obstruction of witness testimony, and unlawful influence of a county judicial official. Marsh Duffy and Colton Reed were named as material witnesses. Dale Garner, who had been watching which way the wind blew since Webb's deputy first rode into Red Hollow, had already provided a written statement confirming that he had been instructed to disregard specific incidents at the Hale property on multiple occasions. Margaret Hale, when informed of the indictment, said nothing, which Eleanor was told later by Webb's deputy was the first time anyone in Red Hollow could remember Margaret Hale having nothing to say. Eleanor gave her formal deposition on the 4th day. She sat in a federal office on a wooden chair across a long table from Webb and a stenographer and 2 attorneys, and she talked for 4 hours. She talked clearly. She talked completely. She did not flinch, and she did not cry, and she did not soften anything or make anything easier to hear than it actually was. When it was over, the lead attorney said, "Mrs. Whitaker, your account is one of the most thorough I've encountered in 20 years of federal practice." Eleanor said, "I had a long time to prepare it." She bought her stage ticket to Colorado on the 5th day. Caleb walked her to the depot. They stood on the platform, and the stage was being loaded, and the morning was clear and hot, in the particular way of high summer in Montana, and Eleanor held her basket in one hand and her ticket in the other, and looked at him. "Clearwater," she said. "Every 6 weeks," he said, "give or take." She looked at him. He looked at her. She extended her hand. He took it. Not the way Victor had ever taken her hand, not like something being claimed, like something being recognized, like an acknowledgement between two people of equal standing that something true had passed between them and was not finished and did not need to be. She released his hand. She picked up her basket. She turned toward the stage. "Eleanor," he said. She turned back, turned. He was looking at her with that steady look, the one she had first seen across a general store 4 feet away, when the air was full of the specific silence of people choosing to look somewhere else, and he was the only one who hadn't. "Don't disappear," he said. She looked at him for one long moment. "I won't," she said, and meant it the way she meant everything now, completely without the old shadow of fear behind the words, without the calculation of what it would cost her to mean it. She climbed into the stage. The door closed. The driver called out. The stage rolled. Eleanor Whitaker sat with her basket in her lap and watched Billings fall away through the window, and then the road opened up ahead of her, and she looked forward instead of back. Which was, she understood how it was supposed to work. Behind her, Victor Hale's indictment was a piece of paper that would outlast every system he had built. In front of her, Colorado was a place where her cousin Clara had written twice without answer, and would soon get a letter that finally wrote back. And somewhere between here and the next thing at a post station in Clearwater, Montana, every 6 weeks, give or take, there was a name on a list of people to check for mail. Her name, Eleanor Whitaker. Not property, not a household, not a wife managed and contained and reduced to the smallest possible unit of a life. A person, with a name that was entirely her own, and that after 3 years and $47 in a mountain in the dark, and one man who refused to look away, was exactly enough to build a life from.